But yeah. Today we're going to just kind of ride the wake of reactions to the Dragonflight alleged release date. I'm gonna come up with predictions. I've actually set some stuff up. I have dates, predictor models, and all that stuff. Not really. I just kind of threw some shit together, and it seemed to make sense, and I want to share that with y'all. But I'm going to kind of ride that alleged it'll release on or before December 31st, 2022, and we're going to see where that takes us. Because let's touch on some reality for a little bit. They could always push that back if they wanted to. If they're going to delay, they're going to delay. They delayed Shadowlands. It could happen. It can happen again. That December 31st on or before, it's not the law. People say that there are legalities to it. No, there isn't. The fine, whatever legalities or whatever penalties they would pay would be like the loss of more goodwill. That alone is a fuck up. However, I'm going to, I've convinced myself. It's funny. I've convinced myself that yes, it can come out in 2022. The beginning of this year, I was convinced that this would come out in 2022. It's just that the whole idea of 9.2.5 season 4, that kind of messed all that up. And it made me, be like, okay, there's no reason. That was kind of the thing. It wasn't like, oh, it's definitely going to come out. It's not ready, blah, blah. It was more like, well, if they're going to lay down another mini patch as well as another season, it gives them a reason to be like, fuck it. Let's just go to 2023. And they still could. Let's make that clear. People's doubts about it coming out this year are not unfounded. They're not unreasonable. I was convinced of this for a while too, but now I've kind of gone back again to where I was before. And so we're going to talk about why are we coming to this conclusion based on the few statements that they've said, also based on some historical information and just logic. Does this make sense? And so far I think it does. Wood says, I just worry about player feedback being considered. Shadowlands Alpha was out in April for a November launch, an October launch actually. Are they leaving enough time with this one for player feedback and changes? And that's some of the very important context to consider if we were to compare Shadowlands and Dragonflight, which isn't very fair because we don't know everything that's going into Dragonflight, but we know what went into Shadowlands. We had Soulbinds, we had Torghast, we had Conduits. And for those who might remember, Conduits needed a big revamp. And we don't know how much development time had been lost because they were going to revamp it. Little historical thing. Originally, Conduits were going to be a consumable. And every time you wanted to change Conduits, you needed to go back to the source of those Conduits at that item level and farm it up again. And then you can replace your Conduits with the newer Conduits or a replacement Conduit or whatever. So imagine, right now, 9 point whatever it is right now, you're doing fights and you're it's like raid night. And you're like, oh man, I need to switch my Conduits 2 or 3 times throughout the fight. I need to go back into dungeons, farm up the Conduits so I can switch them throughout the fight. That's what it could have been like. And thankfully the backlash was intense enough that we're like, no, don't do that. And so Blizzard was like, okay, let's do this instead. Let's have it be like this, but we're gonna have Conduit energy instead. And we're like, oh god, what's wrong with you guys? So that's how that went. But that's just one example of having the WoW team having to create this auxiliary system. Extra stuff, borrowed power, more things to do. Whereas with Dragonflight, we're not quite seeing that. We don't have, as far as we've seen, and they should have announced this earlier if it was going to be a thing, but we're not seeing no equivalent to Torghast. We're not seeing an equivalent to Warfronts or Island Expeditions. We're not seeing an experimental feature. a new, like a brand new thing, except for dragon riding. In my opinion, though, that feels a bit more limited in scope, and something that there's a group of people that are working on that, but it's not nearly as extensive as, say, Torghast. Just an opinion there. We also know that Dragonflight has been worked on. They started to do more work on Dragonflight earlier than they have in other expansions, with the exception of Warlords and how they just kind of like dropped all their shit. Let's just get right to it. Legion, let's go. And then meanwhile, the Warlords team was like, oh, but then the shipyard. We gotta make the shipyard, guys. They kind of did the same thing here in Shadowlands, opinion. They kind of did the same thing here. They just did it way better. Because from the onset, this is totally out my ass predictions. They're never going to admit this, but I would say in 2020, as soon as they started to do the work from home stuff, the decision makers over in the WoW team, they're all like, so we're not going to be able to do everything that we want to with this expansion, guys, because we're fucked. We're kind of fucked. We need to decide now. What are we going to shift around? What are we going to cut? And that sort of thing. And so I think that early on, very early on, okay, not that early on, they had what they had, but they're like, okay, let's work with what we've got, and and then try to commit more resources to Dragonflight, because more than anything, if we were to look at this in hindsight, it certainly does feel like, if nothing else, the WoW team is committed to having 2-year expansion cycles, give or take a month or two. They're committed to that. Having an extra 6 months or so, not something that they're really interested in on their timetable. And so based on the dates that we're seeing, we are looking at like 20-something months, 24, 25 months of an expansion before they move on to other stuff. And they've also straight up said, oh yeah, it's farther along than you think. We've been working on it for quite a bit longer. And even some tweets from developers that I've seen on Twitter, some folks are just confident, hey, we know that you're concerned about like our mental health and like crunch and all that stuff. We're okay. We'll see if that they're just like blowing smoke or not. But at least at the moment, there's no choice but to take their word for it and be like, okay, yeah, fine. You guys say you're fine. We're trying to be concerned for you. If you guys are confident, then okay. I said earlier, like a while back, that, I like this desperate Blizzard. I like this Blizzard that's backed against the wall and, and trying to do their best to regain, to get some good faith back, so regain some goodwill, I should say. But I also like the kind of confident Blizzard too. And that was evidenced when they were doing like all the rounds of interviews after the Dragonflight announcement, straight up interviewing with like anybody. They interviewed with Asmongold, and they had a very good, Ian and Asmongold had a very good interview. And Ian seemed confident about what was being offered. This is what we're doing for players. This is what we're doing to cater to the solo audience. Here's what's going to happen with like Master Looter. There are all these things that sound as if they're listening to players. And the one experimental thing that they're trying to do is dragon riding, which is going to be controversial, no doubt. People are going to be like, "Oh God, this is terrible. Give me my old flying back." We've already seen those sorts of conversations, and so we're going to see that. We're going to see that prop up. But are we going to see something like Torghast? It doesn't sound like it. The controversy around Renown, it never reached like a very high level of discourse. People were just like, oh no, something time gating. But even then, they're listening to that as well, which I'm thankful for. They seem to be responding a lot more. Let me read some chat really quick. If they have to push it to 2023 to release a banger expansion, I'd be fine with it. I hope they don't rush it. And we know how Shadowlands was at launch. Lull. I totally agree, Dragon. They delayed 1 month. It wasn't enough. They had to go as far as releasing a 905 patch to add whatever it was. It wasn't much. Valor, some fixes, blah, blah, blah. That, I believe, was, February or March. I forget off the top of my head. But to me, that was kind of like the official launch of Shadowlands. It wasn't, but that's when I think they felt like, okay, we're kind of getting caught up now. Like they were that far behind. Is that going to happen here? Hard to say. But they have at least planned this out with all of their, with all these situations in mind. It's not like the Blizzard lawsuit is behind them. That stuff is still going on. The pandemic is not behind us. That's still going on. But they're living with it now. They're producing with all that stuff in mind. And that's something that's worth considering when it comes to their ability to plan and produce and get stuff out. But they do seem committed to a 12-month, to like a 2-year sort of release cycle. It seemed like most people here were thinking that it would release January 2023, or so December 2022 isn't that much sooner, especially if they wait until New Year's Eve. I'll talk about that with some of my date predictions. So, Backer X says they did a huge amount of testing and still had a major magic damage bug that took almost 2 months of live play to find. I don't even know what that is. Zakar is just overall excited for whatever Dragonflight has. Smiley face. Basically, Dragonflight is taking the game back to basics. In a way, yes. Now, it's basics plus, the many, many years of experience and abilities and fun stuff that they've made, and they're cramming it into, talents. They're simplifying that system. Let's not worry about those sorts of catch-ups. Let's just give everyone almost all the things that they want as soon as they hit max level. I think that is not new. It's not revolutionary in the slightest, but it'll be a very, very welcome change of pace for players who are going to find their characters to feel much more complete right at max level. And all that's missing is gear, trinkets, maybe set bonuses, and who knows what other enhancements that they might talk about. And I might talk about in some other video, maybe. I think they can pull it off. Just 8 new dungeons, new zones, and Dragonflight so far, and the profession stuff. Yeah, the profession stuff is going to be big, but fortunately, it's a very centralized thing, and they have talked about that. They only had so much to show, but at least for that 1 or 2 weeks, they were very engaged with the community council. And, I've produced a whole bunch of videos that talk about, okay, this is what they're doing now. Here's the latest update from professions. And so, because, that's going to be a big thing, and they have talked about it. So, just like how they've talked about Torghast and island expeditions and whatnot. And there might be problems with it. I totally anticipate, screw-ups and bugs and issues and design decisions that we find questionable. That's fine. But the question is it going to be out on time for a 2022 release? Maybe. I also don't think Shadowlands had a problem of too little content rather than a lot of dev time seemed to go into features that didn't turn out to be popular. Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I would say if they put in more time into say Torghast, and they were able to create game modes that felt more satisfying to players. People talked about an endless one. I've talked about leaderboards. There's all sorts of things that woulda, shoulda been done. That's always a thing. But in this case, it doesn't seem to be that big of a demand. Dragon writing seems to have been heavily tested already internally, and that's not too hard either. Because dragon riding it's a player experience. It's not exactly, oh, here's something that we got to balance over time. Here's something that we need to do proper pacing for and things like that. Dragon riding, I would say dragon riding and environment world content, they very much go hand in hand, because from the sounds of it, they're going to have a very, very close relationship with how we interact with the world, at least early on. Once we get traditional flying back, then it all goes out the window, whatever. But at least until then, dragon riding is kind of like the vehicle that will take us through the initial Dragonflight ride, and then things will change. So I feel like they have to be hiding an extra feature. I mean, it feels like something is missing to me still. I mean, it seems like it, but the big thing is the whole borrowed power scheme. Not having that frees up the daily flow for a player considerably, which begs the question, what's a player going to do? Are they going to hang out on alts? Is the WoW team going to be just okay with fewer people putting in overall fewer hours because they don't need to farm for a thing all the time? Maybe. The things that I think are either understated or just haven't been talked about, two things. One is the 4 reputations that are coming in Dragonflight. It was said that those are going to have like an enhanced reputation track, kind of like Renown, kind of not really, but they're going to include things. My question is if those 4 reputations are going to come with like the kind of structure as covenants, not exactly like joining one covenant and doing a thing. That they already said that that's not how it's going to be. But I'm talking about, is there going to be a ton of shit to farm for each of these main reputations? No idea. I hope that they do, because what the WoW team did with covenants and introducing all sorts of activities, separate activities, and not exactly equal, but just a ton of stuff to do, it's been amazing. I think that's like the best part about Shadowlands. It's the whole collection scheme. There's just so much stuff to get from each thing. Korthia has a ton of stuff. The Covenants, already talked about that. Even Torghast has a lot of stuff. It just takes a lot of work in order to get all those things. Zereth Mortis has a lot of stuff. And they've included all sorts of different ways to collect stuff. So smaller features like that, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure we just haven't seen them talk about that yet, because for them, maybe they're thinking like, they don't need to know that. They don't need to know everything right from the get-go. Not when we're not entirely sure what is, how we want to present it or how we want the experience to be. So I don't mind that we don't know about that yet. It doesn't exactly instill confidence, right? Don't get me wrong. But when we see it, then, if we don't see it until the alpha or the beta, there's no problem with that, because they didn't need to announce it. No mission table, no scenarios, no Warfronts or Torghast is what I'm thinking is missing here. Is it missing, or was that just extra? Right? Or Warfronts were fun. I really liked Warfronts, and I'm pretty bummed that it just didn't work out. Stromgarde was great. Darkshore was doo-doo butter. I did not like Darkshore. But Stromgarde was awesome. Part of the problem with Warfronts was that you didn't get much out of it. You ran it, you ran it once per tune every like 2 or so weeks. And what do you get from it? Like a transmog set, basically. Which is cool. I like the Horde set. I think the Alliance set does look awesome too. See? I can like the other faction a little bit as well. But that's all that are offered. And so having that much effort go into just like the experience, and then after that it feels super repetitive because it feels very samey, and you're just getting a gear set from it, very limited, unfortunately. Between the gear set and then the commendation things that you get to like get some more stuff, it just didn't have like a whole lot to it. Excuse me. But as for other stuff, like a Torghast and a mission table and things like that, you also got to think like the things that we get from that were simply means to an end. We did it so we could get like Azerite gear. We did it so we can get Soul Ash and Soul Cinders. But what if like the outdoor world fulfilled those sorts of things too? So while we're not seeing a feature, a thing, an experimental thing, maybe we're going to see some really kick-ass outdoor content. Maybe we're going to see way more different kinds of, like, let's say world quests. Y'all know that, they're like hundreds, almost. Well over 100 some different kinds of world quests, but it definitely feels like we're doing the same thing. But what if they added like triple the amount of that? It would still feel the same after a while, but the variety is there. The increased variety is there. During Shadowlands, we didn't get a lot of just regular side quest content. It was extremely limited. Those who played through Bastion side quest content, that was rough. Revendreth side quest content, much better. There was a lot more to it, but it was very inconsistent, unfortunately. Very shit. But what if they just have more? What if they just have better? What if they just have better stuff? And that's something to consider too. Let's see. I have a small in with a partner company that is helping Blizzard with the new expansion. They're stating that they are confident on a December release. I'm still thinking with all the management changes in the company and takeover by Microsoft, we will see it in February. I mean, I have a feeling that when it comes to like the day-to-day operation of making a video game, Blizzard is, the WoW team isn't affected by this, by that at all. Management side of things, different. But when it comes to, hey, can we put out games? No, we're in the middle of a buyout, so yeah, we're gonna delay it. But no, I don't buy it. I don't buy that as a narrative. I'm sure you'll get stuff from the dragon riding activities. Oh, no doubt. There's going to be cosmetics. There's going to be some awesome shit that we'll be able to get from it. But I'm just thinking it's not the scale of like Torghast, Warfront, Island Adventures, and that sort of thing. Didn't they say every zone was going to be so big that each zone would have its own endgame content? I don't recall that exact phrasing, but just that the zones were much bigger. They're big on the scale of Wrath of the Lich King zones, which were very big. And they had, and I did like those zones because they were big and they had what I found to be an appropriate amount of empty space. Because it's nice to have, I'm no game designer, obviously, but I think it was cool to have that feeling of, okay, I'm going to go from point A to point B. And then you have that bit of time where you're traveling or you're flying or you're walking or whatever. And you just have a moment to look around. Dude, this is cool, man. Look at that mountain range over on the side there. I think I see a castle that's kind of like a fort or something that's attached to it. I'm looking in this other direction and it's like, okay, is that a pirate ship that's going down? That's making circles around that area. That's fucking crazy. So having that sort of feeling, I'm looking forward to it. I'm very much looking forward to the outdoor content in there. I feel like Islands and Torghast are still systems that could be continued and improved. I mean, I would be happy to see, like one thing that people were talking about with Dragonflight was, hey, dude, we could have like a bronze dragon zone thing. And as it's kind of like the Lost Woods and you're going through and all of a sudden you're like in a different time era and it looks different and there's random, basically like Torghast, where you see random stuff, but instead you're visiting like these different timelines and locales and stuff and weird shit happens. So taking the tech and moving it into something new, totally all for it, right? I think the focus though is what they said. They're focusing on evergreen systems. They're focusing on talents and professions. And that's kind of it. Those are the big things. Those are the big features of Dragonflight. Working on stuff that they've had for a long ass time, and it's really time for a big revamp. Professions kind of they took a step forward with respect to how Chromie time would work and things like that. But now it's time to actually get into these professions and mess with stuff and see what happens there. They're not touching much legacy stuff like Chromie time or the level switch. That will be disappointing, actually. If they don't do any like changes or whatnot with Chromie time, I'd love to see something there. Like, to just have them not kick you out of Chromie time, to not force you out right away, and then just enjoy Chromie time and just live in that expansion and then play through it as if it was like that end game. Like imagine if you could imagine your max level. Imagine you're level 70 now, right? But then you want to be like, hey, I want to go into Shadowlands Chromie time and do end game. All right. And so it scales you down. Your level goes down, you lose abilities, whatever. Your item level is capped, maybe. And then you can play through it as if it's endgame. That's super complicated. Because you got to think, okay, how am I progressing through endgame? Like, am I just going to go into like these dungeons and raids, I guess? And then does it scale up or something like that? So I don't exactly have to like gear up and I can just kind of go through the experience as if it was real. I don't know. So anyway, I wanted to talk about, can they do a 2022 release, right? And so I'm going to have a hard time explaining this. I'll do my best. So I was able to get from from some other site like a bunch of start dates from every season in World of Warcraft, and from that I used some, I am very smart, so I used the formula to like kind of get a count between these start and end dates, how many days, how many weeks, how many months. And from this, I wanted to kind of get an idea of the trends of how long should a season be, and how long is season 3 and season 4 of Shadowlands going to be, and will that fit with a possible 2022 release? And so, it is kind of fun to look at how all these work. So like we look at let's go with the more modern WoW, starting with Warlords. So Warlords, that had a length that, for season 1 was 6 months, season 2 4 months, season 3 8 months. Legion had a little bit different. Like Legion is when they started doing the 0.5 patches, 0.5 1 2.5 1 3 whatever. But they did a season for each 0.5 for each increment, which was very interesting. So we had very short seasons, which maybe people liked, maybe they didn't like, whatever. But you had these shorter seasons, 2 months, 3 months, 2 months, 2 months, 2 months, and so on. Once they hit BFA though, that's when you started to see like, okay, we're just gonna have one season because we're able to just have like instead of what we did before in Legion, this time we're gonna have like a full season throughout the entire patch. So like if there's like a 9.1 or 8.1, it's going to include 8.1.5. And so that's why in BFA, that's when they pretty much cut the seasons in half from 7 all the way down to 4 for each of the major patches. And that kind of made sense. But we also saw like much longer seasons, 4-month season, 5-month season, or actually 22 weeks, 22 weeks. And then the 38 is kind of an aberration because that's the end of the expansion. In Shadowlands though, we see we see some different stuff, and I'll just show these right here so you can kind of see these are relatively accurate dates. They go with the start date, but then they're also following the PvP season, so it's kind of like a give or take a week or so. But we're seeing that season 1, 29 weeks, about 6 months. Season 2 was 33 weeks, about 7 months, maybe 8 months I think it's 8 months if you round it up. And then season 3, we're not quite sure. Season 3 started early March 1st. It has been 3 months into this season, although it might feel like 6 years to some of you guys. But we're at that point. In earlier interview with Warcraft Radio maybe, or Starting Zone, it was an interview with, I believe, Morgan Day, before he became assistant game director, and he said that the average season length is like 6 to 8 months. That's kind of like what their sweet spot is. Shadowlands has gone closer to the 8-month range, but we can see that their first 2 seasons were about 6 or 7 months each. And so I thought to myself, okay, let's go with that. And that's why there's a lot of folks that also share the opinion that, okay, if Shadowlands Season 3 is going to be a minimum of 6 months, so let's go with that. Let's pretend that Shadowlands Season 3 is going to end either late August or early September. Something like that. And I'm trying to see some shit. Why isn't it going? Okay, there we go. So I guesstimated it at August 30th, and that'll give us a 26-week season. The trend isn't so great. The trending is like really all over the place. But seeing a minimum 26-week season, that can kind of work. That's still going to be about 2 months from now. 8-9 resets. Still a lot of time for people to clear their mythic or heroic milestones, to get their AOTC, get their cutting edge. That seems reasonable. Now, from that, Season 4 would have an estimated start date of September 6th. And I decided that the season would end on the first day of the Dragonflight launch, which I'm going to guesstimate is December 13th. And here's why. Here's why I said December 13th. I said December 13th. I don't know if you can see this calendar very well. December 13th fits. It makes sense. December 6th, November 29th. These feel a little bit early. I'm going with the latest possible date, where they launch on the 12th / the 13th worldwide, and then as soon as the dust settles throughout that week, hella people go on break. Fuck you guys. Time for some vacation. Now, let's take into context, before we get to that, with a season length like this, we're looking at a 14-week season, which fits with Blizzard's statement saying that Season 4 of Shadowlands is going to be a shorter season. This is definitely a shorter season. We're looking at almost half as long as Season 3. Definitely much shorter than the season before that. But let's also take into context like what this season is. It's a remix of raids that we've already done. I'm not counting on there being a lot of people coming back for Season 4. For a lot of folks, the lull began in March. Once they completed the content that they felt like doing, they were done. And they're like, oh, Season 4? Fuck that. What Season 4 was, in my observation, is something to cater to folks that are still around. And they're going to be hanging out, and they want to do some cool stuff. And so they're like, hey, let's give them something to do. There's a lot of folks, and I totally understand this 100%. There are a lot of folks who are saying that Dragonflight is being squeezed in for a 2022 release. I don't contest that, but I'm offering a different theory here. I think they did plan for a 2022 release this entire time. They were planning for this from almost the beginning. From a very early point. But at some point, they were like, hey, you know what? There's some experiments that we want to run. Maybe we can do some cool shit with like raids and dungeons and stuff. Can we cram a Season 4 into this? Can we take 14 weeks out of Season 3, 12 to 14 weeks out of Season 3 and do stuff with it? Can we do that, team? Because remember, Season 4 entails more dungeons, which are, and when dungeons are turned into Mythic Pluses, that's kind of like an investment that will last a little bit longer, right? Because of time walking and things like that. And then the remixed raids, which do involve tuning, which do involve like rebalancing and stuff, and doing a snazzy ability or something like that, and it does need a crew to kind of stay on top of it. But it's not. I would posit that it's not like that big of a deal. It doesn't require that much work. So I'm willing to guess that the WoW team was like, "Hey, let's create a Season 4. let's cram it in there. Let's mess with stuff. Let's see how that works. Now, also keep in mind that 12/13 is, it's the middle of December. That's going to mean that the middle of November is going to be when the pre-patch drops. Because we've seen historically that the pre-patches last for roughly a month, for about 4 resets worth. Something like that. Now, as far as, we don't know this for sure, but so far, we haven't seen any evidence that the Evoker is going to be available to play. But it probably will be. It might be, it will be, I don't know. I mean, Demon Hunters were, right? Yeah, I think Demon Hunters were playable during the pre-patch if you pre-ordered. And if not, then whatever. I'm pretty sure that's right. So it gives that chance for evokers to mess around with stuff. And we're still working on a fairly we'll still have a full rotation of all the faded versions of the raids. That's something to consider too. With the faded raids, we're going to see like a rotation of each of the 3 Shadowlands raids: Castle Nathria, Sanctum, Sepulchre. 14 weeks gives us 3.5 rotations, so we get to see all these 3 raids a couple times. It kind of puts into question like how quickly will people be able to gear up from those raids, because that's what people are going to do it for. They're going to be preparing their characters for Dragonflight stuff. They're going to they're going to try to farm up bosses so they can get those tokens, so they can upgrade the gear and things like that. And I think this fits, because it'll give evokers a full rotation to try out each of the faded raids, give them a test drive, plus all the pre-patch changes, plus like the talents and everything's gonna feel all jacked up. So I think that fits too. And then there's the length of the test cycle. And I had to double check this. The Shadowlands test cycle, it started in April, like early-ish April. And it took about 7 or 8 months. After 7 or 8 months, and I say 7 or 8 months because Shadowlands was supposed to launch in October. It ended up being pushed back a month to November. So it was like closer to like 8 months or so. Season 3, the lull began March 1st. And if we count 7 to 8 months, we're still on track for a release of Shadowlands. Now, there are things that we haven't seen yet. We haven't seen the alpha start yet, and those are obvious milestones to consider when it comes to when the expansion may possibly come out. But I'm also considering just the raw amount of time. Like, if they could. Alpha and beta, they're kind of arbitrary things. They can decide, hey, you know what, we're just going to go straight into beta because we just feel like calling it beta now. Or we can say the beta is only going to last for 1 month and the alpha is going to last. They can kind of sort of make that up if they want to. The thing is, though, the time frame, the range of time that the team has available to them, it still fits. It's still enough time. And if we also consider fewer systems to work on, no Torghast, no borrowed power shits to worry about, and they're just working on other stuff, they kind of have that flexibility. They have that time. They have the leeway to commit to this sort of timeline. And so season 1 of Dragonflight would begin early January. Now, that's going to feel a little bit different because we're used to having 2 weeks of game time to just fuck around and do stuff before we start getting into season content. With a release date like this, we're looking at about 3 weeks, I think. Well, let me double check. So we're looking at December 12/13. So that gives 1, 2, 3 weeks. I definitely see the team not being here for almost this entire 2-week period. But then for the season to start on the 3rd, after everyone's back home. Maybe even a bit longer, but I think that would be pushing it. I think people are very accustomed to having like a 2-week starting period for the expansion. Pushing that out to 3 weeks, I think that might be pushing it mentally, because some people, you know, they're gonna feel restless. Come on, dude, we're already mythicked out. I got 100% mythic gear. I got max dragon riding, whatever it is. Give me the content. Give me the content. So that wouldn't surprise me either. But I think this is the most ideal timeline if we're going for a 2022 release. And it fits. And if it doesn't, fight me on it, so I can come out of this stronger. They've said Evoker will be available pre-patch for people who pre-order. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. NB says that I'm still not buying the patch was cut theory. With the exception of a mini raid, we got basically the same amount of content from BFA, and no one claimed a patch was cut from BFA. Stuff happens, right? Stuff happens. I'm not gonna hold them to a score or whatnot. Like I said earlier, I firmly believe that the WoW team had decided early on what was going to be cut, and so they planned around it, and so they crafted this experience around it. And as janky as it might have felt for some folks, it's not nearly as bad as how it went with Warlords. I think Warlords was handled very poorly by comparison. And while Shadowlands was a mixed bag, they did a lot better at cutting the content and still making something that was reasonably coherent. Not everyone's going to agree with me on that, but I'm thinking about the comparison just as much as I'm thinking about the actual, how it was actually received. Going back to the dates here, like, what do you guys think? And I'm doing this on I'm putting this out on YouTube as well. Like, what do you guys think? Do you guys think that this is a reasonable timeline? Do you think it doesn't work? Do you think that it's still not enough time? Do you think, nah, screw that, Blizzard should take as much time as they need and delay things? Because my opinion, I think they could push this back. They could and they should push this back. No need to rush if they don't have to. But this is also based on my limited knowledge and perspective of what is coming. If what is coming doesn't need that much more time, okay. How much more do you need to, how much more polish would another month or two give, depending on, what system we're talking about? Do they need an extra month for like talents and things like that? I'm not sure. But I remember that one of the delays, at least what they said, one of the delays of Shadowlands was because the Maw experience wasn't what they wanted it to be, which is kind of a big deal because a lot of folks did not like the Maw. And this is after the delay. This is after they fixed things. And so my hopes are that with what's coming in Dragonflight, it's gonna be quite the turnaround because one, there's no Maw. This is an expansion that's very much based on having much more freer movement thanks to dragon riding. It's not going to be freeform movement, mind you, but it's not going to have that sort. It's not going to have that sort of feel from the onset, at least. And that's all I got for right now. So for the VOD people, that's it. Like the video, subscribe for more content, and let me know what you think about this. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.